Very excited to have Matt Larosiere on today to talk about being a gun rights attorney and also how homemade guns are going to be before the Supreme Court. Before we get started, though, I have a new sponsor. If you're somebody who's been interested in detoxing your liver for all kinds of reasons, you eat too many sugars, processed foods, you've never done a liver detox, you should check out my new sponsor. If you go to, let me just make sure I get the code up here, getliverhelp.com/Allison. You get this. They got a special deal for you too. Another omega-3 product that comes with it. These are formulated by naturopathic physicians and regular conventional doctors as well. There is an amazing ingredient list. Here they are: turmeric, bioperine, beet, dandelion, milk thistle, artichoke extract, ginger, alfalfa, which my son loves to eat the alfalfa cubes from the horses. A bunch of great stuff that's all natural, herbal in nature, and really appreciate having them on the show. Again, if you go to getliverhelp.com/Allison, you get the product along with an omega-3, and you can also support by just checking them out. Check them out and let me know what you think. Matt, thanks for coming on. I'm going to switch us here so that here we go. Okay. I want to show everybody this article from Vox, and I think it's interesting because, first off, the term ghost gun is what everybody seems to use, like in the media, and you're muted, just so you know. I don't know if you know that. Okay. The term ghost gun is what the media uses. It seems like they kind of picked that up because the government started using that term, or at least fed that to them. So can we start with the term ghost gun? Because I titled this, I decided to call that because I'm a little, I'm just not sure, like, is ghost gun the appropriate way to say it? Or is that already we're starting with a politicized term that makes us want to think something negative about making guns at home?
This is actually super fascinating. So we looked into this, me and my co-host Ivan, who does the weekly show on Fudbusters with me, looked into this to find out where that term originated from. And the first time we found it used was actually it's a really nerdy thing, but this was one of the prototype AR-10s that was full auto, was then found in the house of one of the engineers who had just taken it. He'd never registered because he didn't care. And a couple generations later, it gets found after he's dead. And they referred to it as a ghost gun. It was the Ghost AR because it had just never been registered. It was unserialized and whatever. And this was, I think, 1970. I don't know exactly, but that was the first time the term was used, and that obviously has no connection to the stupidness that they're applying it to now. But I do think that is an interesting little factoid. No, so they use the term ghost gun because they're trying to hone in on traceability. And the funny thing is, homemade gun, DIY firearms, ghost gun, whatever, they're exactly as traceable as most firearms that were ever made, and I'm happy to explain why.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I think I'll roll up this report I found on congress.gov in a second while you're explaining this to us, but it seems like depending on what side of the issue you fall on, you're either inflating, or not, the concern or the damage done by guns without serial numbers. And if you're somebody who really wants more gun control, you're saying that this is a real problem. They keep showing up at crime scenes, and if we could just get rid of these, then we wouldn't have so much crime. And so, so let's go to that right now. Well, what's the real problem?
There isn't one. is the truth of the matter. And we can talk about the data and how it all shakes out, but the reason there's a perceived problem is because of this idea, right? This CSI inspired belief that if you have a firearm serial number, it can automatically inform law enforcement of the criminal intent of whoever has it, where it is, where it's changed hand and everything like that. But if you actually look at the law and the implementing regulations, you can see it very clearly recognizes that the serial number is only good at getting you from the manufacturer to the first retail purchaser. And this might come as a shock to some of your audience who may buy SIG products, but firearms are actually durable and they can last for a number of years. And so a firearm that's changed hands in the used market once or twice, or is more than 10 or 15 years old, which most firearms are, will not be traceable in the normal course of events. So again, it's the presence of a serial number. Like here, I have a completely normal, Colt 1911 in 45, and it has a serial number on it. This thing was made a bajillion years ago, and there is no way that the first person who purchased it at retail has any idea who I am, right? So this is a ghost gun. Even though it's got a serial number and it was logged into a bound book and everything, this is a ghost gun. It's exactly as traceable as a gun that you make yourself, like this one. They're all the same, really.
One of the reasons that I saw that this issue is going before the Supreme Court is because I just had Dexter Taylor on, who we'll talk about in a second, who was charged with making ghost guns essentially by New York State.
Yeah. And
he was just convicted and he's facing 18 years, though he's awaiting sentencing right now while in prison. And, when you hear the case, because they were not allowed to bring up the Constitution at all. Apparently, the defense was not allowed to say it. Even witnesses were not allowed to bring up the Constitution. What's up with that? When you're somebody who's on trial for this, why can't you bring up the Constitution?
Okay, so you're going to make me the absolute. You're going to make me reviled by your audience because there's actually a reason. So the constitutionality of a statute is a question of law, and that is for the court to decide. The jury is a fact finder. It is not to decide the legal status of a law. The jury can only decide issues of fact. And so putting testimony about constitutional defenses is really problematic because you're supposed to make those arguments to the judge. Now, the judge is then supposed to faithfully discharge his duty in finding something unconstitutional that violates the Constitution. And of course, we know that is kind of a hilarious joke. If you bring that up in most lower courts, they go, "No, I deny it because any reason," right? Like they'll make something up. Usually, they won't follow the Bruin test, but they'll say this is outside the scope of the Second Amendment. So once that's done in a criminal case, you don't get another bite at the apple until after judgment. Then you go to the appeals court and say, "Hey, big court, stupid little court was an idiot and read the law wrong." Those are the two times you get to say it. You don't get to say, "Hey, jury, stupid idiot judge was, wrong about the law." Of course, there's always jury nullification, right? Where the jury can take that into account and just refuse to convict. But if you're an attorney and you bring up jury nullification, you'll be hung by the neck until dead.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to this case before the Supreme Court, does one way or the other on people like Dexter Taylor?
So that didn't come through at all.
If depending on what happens with the Supreme Court and they're deciding on quote ghost gun regulations, does that have an effect on someone like Dexter Taylor?
So no, most likely not, because the case that Supreme Court took up, Vanderstock v. Garland, is about an administrative rulemaking, and it was basically that federal law defines what a firearm is, and it defines that to include the frame or receiver of a firearm. And for those of you who aren't know, I have here, this is the frame or receiver of a Glock. This is a Glock receiver right here. Just the one part that's considered the regulated firearm. The law says that, right, that is included in the definition. So it kind of comes down to that's the one part that has to be serialized if it's made by a federal firearms licensee. If you're not a federal firearms licensee, there's no requirement in federal law that you mark, within information, your frames. So what they did here was, I guess, taking a step back, over the past few years, we really saw an explosion in DIY at-home gunsmithing. The real fact is, though, it's not a new phenomenon. In fact, at the time of the founding, the most common way to affordably get a gun was to import the lock work, the actual like hammer and lock mechanism for your firearm from France or Spain, and then have a local guy cobble together the rest of the stuff, because then you'd save on, you know, transportation expenses. You'd save on a lot locally making as much as possible, but those things that were difficult to machine, you'd buy overseas, you know, from people who are better at manufacturing them than Americans ever were or ever could be. So that's like the baseline that this has been going on in the United States since literally the time of the founding. Then people kind of rediscovered it in the realm of 3D printing and like the 80% receivers, where it's like, okay, we've made this thing, whatever it is, it's not done, right? You can have it and you can do what you want with it. And so people would finish receivers, and that's totally legal. And effectively, this was the Biden administration saying, we've got to do something, despite the fact that there was no power to do something. So they used the Administrative Procedures Act, which is designed to help a administering agency like the ATF clarify a regulation, but it's very specific. To clarify, you have to make a term less ambiguous. And the way they attempted to clarify what a frame or receiver is was by taking one sentence from a statute, giving it a like 8-paragraph definition with new terms in it that had their own definitions. And that was like, it was completely impermissible. This is basically the ATF completely rewriting the law, and that's not okay. And so that's what Vanderstock v. Garland's going to be all about. The problem is that that's not going to help people in New York, where they have a unconstitutional law that says you can't make your own gun, basically.
Yeah. I was wondering with his case, if the reason he was convicted, though I wasn't in the courtroom, and honestly, you know, you could talk to Dexter, but the New York prosecution, I mean, they went straight to the media at the beginning when they arrested him, and they had their whole press release and did their press conference and all their talking points about how dangerous this is, even though this guy, like, you know, never had a criminal record and makes tables for fun. You know, he just likes the craft of making things, you know, and he's a real constitutionalist. So yeah, so it seemed like it's like if he got convicted because the jury probably was like, well, yeah, you broke New York's laws. But the question is, are New York's laws legal? You know, should New York have those laws? And how,
So
you know, how do you?
They can't be constitutional. They cannot be constitutional. There's no way.
So what does somebody like he have to do to get out of jail? I mean, does somebody have to sue New York, and then that has to go to the Supreme Court in order for him to get released? And then what would happen? Would he have to go through a retrial, or it comes on appeal, or how would that all work itself out?
So basically, he's going to have to appeal it. All right. One second. Where was his conviction?
Here, I'm going to pull it up right now. I'll pull it up right now.
I'll tell you
Brooklyn.
That was Brooklyn State Court?
Well, I think, what you mean, what court was he in specifically?
Yeah.
Oh man. Brooklyn Supreme Court.
Okay. Well, so yeah, that's state court. And it's interesting because New York gets it backwards, where the Supreme Courts are the lower courts and then the courts of appeal are the highest courts. Which, yeah, it's funny that the Supreme Court is the lowest court in New York. But whatever. It's just the normal New York thing where everything's wrong. But so in a state law prosecution, here's the big problem. You're bringing up a federal right, a federal issue. The state courts have the ability to adjudicate federal constitutional claims, right? So basically, he's stuck in this process where he's going to have to then appeal to the next level of the state court system, and basically go all of the way to the New York Supreme Court, which is the New York Court of Appeals, and basically have the top court in New York say, this doesn't violate the Second Amendment, or we're declining to address your Second Amendment concern. And then the only option is a straight shot for him to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's discretionary. So if the Supreme Court isn't feeling like it, they don't have to take his case up. And that's really problematic, especially where New York doesn't have a real right to arms in its constitution. One was written there, but for many, many decades, they've just said, yeah, we were joking, LOL. So the only protection he's going to get is a federal Second Amendment claim. And I don't think you're going to see the federal Second Amendment given much weight in New York state courts. So it's his only fair shot is going to be at the U.S. Supreme Court, which is a moonshot. Mm. Mm-hmm. And that's wildly unfair. And as for why this can't be constitutional, well, it's simple, right? Because we know that the Second Amendment covers the right of the people to keep and bear arms. And that right has been repeatedly upheld in the various federal courts of appeal, including some of the most unfriendly ones, that it necessarily includes the right to acquire a firearm, right? So we've had courts already recognize that that a city can't ban all gun stores, right, from existing, right? Because people have to be able to acquire a firearm. And then, but a lot of people are like, wait, but like to make it yourself, that's not. Well, think about it. If you have the right to acquire something, if you have the right to have something, what is the simplest way that you can get it? Well, there's only one way you can get it without having someone else's consent, without having it to agree with another person, and that's to make it yourself. And so if the right to keep and bear arms doesn't include a right to build one yourself, then it just doesn't, it's an entirely illusory right, then it doesn't exist. It means that if you're an asshole and no one wants to do business with you, you actually don't have a right. And I don't think that's how the First Amendment works. So I certainly don't think that's how the Second Amendment works either.
Okay, I'm going to bring you back to the Vox article in a second because of the way that they talk about evading federal regulations and making it sound like the making of a firearm isn't in of itself trying to evade the government, rather than looking at it like you have a right to make a firearm and the government is the one cracking down illegally or unconstitutionally on your right to do so. Like, in other words, looking at like our rights as if the government gives us our rights, and so if they take them away, then we're evading them versus it being a right that's written into the Constitution. But hang on a second. If you want to send me some mail, thank you to everybody who sent me some mail. I've gotten some great letters from people. You can send me P.O. Box 3355, Denellen, Florida, 34432. I'm finding one of my favorite ones. Hi, Allison. Here is some feed money for your animals. I was woofing in Northern Ireland when COVID broke out and had to come back early. So that's from Sherry. Keep up your good work. Thanks, Sherry. I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who sends me support through the mail. If you don't like using a credit card, it's a great way to do it. And I love hearing from everyone. Also, don't forget, we are launching the Allison Wine Club at AllisonWinePromo.com. AllisonWinePromo.com has been around for a long time. Thank you to those of you who have tipped back a glass in honor of free speech. It's a great gift idea. And we're now expanding to different countries so we can be extremists all over the globe. And you're going to get 6 new bottles every 3 months. We're all going to be talking about it. I just interviewed Diego, who is the guy who goes to every single vineyard and picks out what we're going to be drinking. And the story is really interesting. You'll hear about the extremist altitude wines from Argentina. That's where he is right now. And all the other different places. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to like make it a whole thing. So if you're interested in wine, if you like this kind of stuff and you want to talk more about it and learn more about it, and also just have more camaraderie around it with myself included, then please join the AllisonWinePromo.com. You'll be on the list, sir, if you get your wines, and we're going to launch the club meetings very soon.